Hi, everybody. This is Ron with AutoUrge, and as you can see, we're all still under quarantine or stay-at-home orders, whatever you want to call it, due to the current situation we find ourselves in. So I'm in my home garage today, and we're getting ready to talk with Ryan Ledesma, who is AutoUrge's head of photography and lead photographer. And he's going to share some tips today on how we can all take better photos using this, which we all have. And there's a lot of us who take pictures with our cell phones. And these cell phones are great. They do a great job by themselves. But with Ryan's help and knowledge, he's gonna tell us how we can take even better photos using our cell phones. So we're going to talk to him here in a few minutes. And hopefully none of my neighbors start up a lawnmower or something like that. But it should be good. And we look forward to hearing what he has to say. So without further ado, let's talk to Ryan. All right. Hi, Ryan. Thanks for joining us today in this special circumstances we're under.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad to be here.
So I thought we would talk today and talk about how the fact that everyone's got one of these, that we can maybe take better pictures using our cell phone. So what is the biggest mistake you see when people take pictures of cars?
So the biggest thing I notice looking at people's cell phone pictures of cars is they're not really paying much attention to the backgrounds and foregrounds. There's a lot of clutter, not interesting backgrounds, just kind of due to the circumstances that probably when they're taking the pictures. And also they're not paying much attention to the light source, so where it's coming from or how soft it is or how bright it is. Those are kind of the two biggest factors when taking pictures of cars that, even with a cell phone, you can pay attention to. Some of the do's and don'ts when picking a location to take pictures of a car or really anything is you really want to pay attention to what's in the background. Is it something interesting? Does it complement the car? A lot of things that work well with cars are kind of industrial areas, warehouses are kind of cool, but just like in front of a house or in front of the Sonic or something aren't necessarily the most scenic places. So you want to pay attention to that, go somewhere kind of in nature, somewhere with some trees behind you, or just somewhere that's kind of industrial or something that complements the car. And you also kind of want to make sure there's nothing going in and out in front of you, traffic and stuff like that. So it's just kind of be aware of what you're putting in front and behind of the car. That's the biggest thing, is you want to be deliberate about it.
Okay, so that kind of covers the background, the scenery of the shot. Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about maybe the next most important thing, which would be probably the lighting.
Yeah, the lighting is definitely probably the more important of the two. There's a couple different options. If you're just starting out, you're mostly dealing with just outside during the day. And so one thing to watch out for is direct sunlight, which, if you're trying to get real creative, you can definitely do some cool stuff with direct sunlight as far as like details. But if you're trying to get wide overall shots, say you're trying to sell your car and you want to show off the car, direct sunlight's going to really cause harsh shadows. And depending on the color of your car, if it's white or a lighter color, it could blow out the color of the paint and give you too dark of shadows at the same time, over and under exposing. So you want to look for shade. You want like in a parking garage or something like that, or under a big tree, depending on the season. One good way to do it, even professional photographers love it, is overcast days. Just cloudy days act as a big diffuser for your light. Basically soften it, bring the light in from all different angles, so that shadow that would have been too dark because the sunlight is getting light from another angle and filling it in. So it kind of helps soften everything up. It allows you to show off the details of the car a little bit more. So another factor in that is if you're, say, in a parking garage and you have light coming in from the side, you still have to be kind of aware of where that angle is coming from. And if it's coming from the side, you might still be getting some shadows on the other side. So you want to kind of have the light behind you. That's going to give you the best overall light, to show off as much of the car as you can.
Okay, great. So in that, you mentioned overexposed and underexposed. So for those of us novices who maybe don't know exactly what it means, can you kind of explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. Overexposed, underexposed, just they're dealing with your highlights and your shadows. An overexposed highlight is something that's a little bit too bright. There's no detail in it. Like I said, if you're taking pictures of a white car in the sunlight, it's going to be kind of hard to see the lines of the car. It's going to be overexposed, and then the shadows will be underexposed sometimes, like say in wheel wells or certain parts of the car will be underexposed, which means it's too dark and there's no detail and it's just blackness. So those are things that you want to watch out for. And like I said, with different lighting techniques, you can kind of avoid them.
So Ryan, what about polarizers? I know that there's some really inexpensive options out there that you can buy. Can you tell us why we would want to consider having a polarizer, and if so, how we would use them and utilize them on our cell phones?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely circular polarizers, as they're called, are definitely a more advanced tool when it comes to automotive photography. But doesn't mean that you can't pick up a cheap one for 10, 15 bucks and start playing around with it. As far as how they work, I don't really know. I'm not a light physicist or something. It's complicated. It has to do with light waves in different directions, but mostly it's used for kind of cutting out reflections, or kind of being directional with the reflections on the car. It's kind of like magic when you first see it. You have to just kind of experience it firsthand. You hold this up, you spin the thing around in front of your lens, and the reflections will change on the car. You're not going to get rid of like the sun or every reflection, but you can kind of really cut down on certain reflections and kind of show off the real color of the car. Or you can even use it to highlight certain reflections if you want a certain pattern or something. Or if you have a kind of back to the scenery stuff, if you have a really nice building or scene in the background or something kind of ugly next to you, sometimes depending on all the criteria, sometimes it will help eliminate those distractions off to the side in the reflections. Nowadays, the auto modes in these cell phones are getting pretty ridiculous. They're getting pretty great. I said, if you're just trying to start out, you want to start experimenting with some of these other tips we've been giving you. I'd say start out just leave it in auto mode. You don't need to worry about exposure and manually adjusting things. You're worried about the core principles like composition and your background and stuff like that, your general lighting. So auto mode has been getting pretty good. You don't really need to worry about doing a whole lot. Some cameras, some phones will even let you kind of like touch on the screen what your subject is, and it'll kind of readjust your settings to expose for that thing, versus say you have a really bright sky and a dark car, it might try to expose for the sky. So if you tell it, I want that car to be exposed, it'll brighten everything up a little bit. So there's a lot of flexibility when you're dealing with auto mode.
Okay.
But I also would say that anyone who's maybe, kind of want to go a little bit further, don't be too afraid to throw it in pro mode or manual mode, whatever it's called on your phone, and start experimenting with it. I know some phones have more or less settings. Some only let you do exposure, brighter and darker. But whatever it is, it's going to give you more control over your lighting, and it's just one of those things you got to play with. And you kind of see what works and what doesn't.
So what is the HDR that I've noticed on my cell phone camera screen? I noticed there's a little HDR in the corner. I've never really played around with it, but can you maybe expand on what that is and why we might want to use it?
Yeah, definitely. It's HDR stands for high dynamic range. It kind of has to do with those highlights and shadows, the over and underexposed we were talking about earlier. It's in one single picture. The camera can't quite see all those details. If it's too bright, it kind of is too bright. If it's too dark, it's too dark. It can only do so much at a time. Whereas HDR will be able to, essentially, it's taking 3 or more pictures at different exposure levels, say the proper exposure for that dark spot and the proper exposure for that bright spot. And it's able to combine all those together and kind of give you a more natural looking picture. As the cameras can't see as much range as a human eye could. So you look at the car and you can see all the detail on the tire, and you can see all the detail on the highlights of the car at the same time. But the camera can't see that much range. So having these separate pictures, it just kind of it combines it together, and it's all done in your camera basically instantly now. And in the early days of HDR, it was kind of unnatural looking, but it's improved a lot in recent years, and it can definitely prove useful if you're out in a high contrast scenario where you can't move the car to a shady spot, or you can't control those aspects. Or even for interior shots, it's very useful because you a lot of times have a lot of light coming in from one direction, and then in the footwells there's nothing, or on the dash there's certain spots. It really helps kind of average out and even up those different lighting scenarios. So it's not the best look all the time. Sometimes it still can look a little weird, but it's definitely improved a bunch, and it's definitely worth experimenting with for different scenarios to see if it helps out.
So we all know the popular cover shot, the 3/4 angled shot, usually from the front or the rear. And I think this shot is not only important for, let's say, a magazine cover, because it does give you an opportunity to show most of the car, but also it's really the shot you want to use if you're wanting to sell your car and post that online. Can you give us some tips as to what we need to know when we're shooting this way?
Yeah. Whenever I'm shooting a car, I call that kind of like the hero shot. It's the main.
Right.
The car looks the coolest it's going to look. From the front or rear, the 3/4 is kind of the go-to shot. If you have a limited time. One major tip that I see people get wrong a lot is kind of about turning the wheels. When you say you're looking at a 3/4 shot, you want to see as much of the wheel as you can. You want to turn the wheel so that you're looking at the face of the wheel. I see sometimes people will just park and they'll take a 3/4 shot, but the wheels turn so you're looking straight at the tire tread. That just doesn't look that good. It's not interesting. You want to show off the wheels, and then same goes for when you're from the rear. If you do a rear 3/4, you want to turn the front wheels so you see the face of it, and that's going to give you kind of like the meanest look when you're looking at a car.
Right.
Another thing I would say is don't be afraid to experiment with how high you are. If you're going up and down, get down low, get closer, get up high. Show if you're trying to sell the car, one technique is kind of you get a little bit higher up. You show off the front, the side, the wheel. You're looking at the hood. You're looking a little bit at the roof. You're looking at like the whole picture of the car. It's a really good main shot to start out with before you get into all the smaller details.
Okay, perfect. So I think we covered a lot of good tips on taking a shot of the car in general, but what about if we want to take some interior shots? Can you explain what we need to take into consideration for an interior type shot?
Well, that's one thing where we talked about HDR earlier, and this is another kind of factor where cell phones are maybe even a better option sometimes than a full SLR would be for taking interior shots. If you're trying to sell the car, you want to show as much wide shots as you can of the back seats and the front seats and all that stuff. And cell phones are pretty good for that. You can kind of just reach back there and just do it. You don't have to worry as much about it as you would with a big camera. But also, because of the size of a cell phone, you're able to kind of get in the weird spots. If you want to get in close and get some macro shots of some details, if you got a cool stick shift knob or some really cool interior trim pieces, or you want to get close up with your speedometer, you can get it in there between the wheel, under the dash. Like, cell phones are pretty great for that,
So you mentioned macro. For those of us that maybe don't know what that means, can you explain what a macro shot is?
Yeah, it's just kind of like a close-up shot. It's you're getting real close. The camera is going to be focusing really close. It's one thing that's great about the cell phones is they generally can focus really close, related to how big they are. If you're trying to fit a full camera in there, you might need a special macro lens, whereas cell phones kind of are able to do it naturally. It's mostly just close-up shots with a singular focus.
So what are some tips for when we want to shoot the engine compartment, or let's say the trunk compartment, which that's probably a little tricky because it is dark back in the area. So what would help us in those type of scenarios where we want to highlight those areas of a car?
So that's one thing that can be pretty tricky, depending on your lighting. If say you're out in the sunlight, you open your hood, whichever direction it opens, and you're almost never going to be able to get it lined up perfectly with the sun so that it's all in the shade. You're always going to get some light sneaking around the side or underneath the hinges or something. You're going to get real stark highlights and then shade. And it's going to be, even with HDR, it's going to be hard to remedy those two together.
Okay.
So I'd say for me, my favorite technique is to try to find some sort of shade, whether it's next to a building, if it's a sunny day, if you can't go inside somewhere, under a tree or something like that. And that's going to give you the nicest overall lighting for an engine compartment as you can, because you do have a lot of shadows and stuff in there, so you want a nice soft light. I'd say, kind of back to macro, you can kind of take advantage of the capabilities of your cell phone and get in close on, say, your valve cover if it's cool looking, and if you got some headers on there, take pictures of details of the engine that are cool that you like. But if you're taking pictures of the whole engine compartment, there's a couple things to watch out for. The bar across the front where your hood's latching to is kind of a sore spot. It's usually a lot brighter looking than the rest of your engine. It's going to kind of draw the eye away from the cool stuff. Windshield washer fluid tanks are big and light, and they're kind of annoying looking too. So, just be aware of what you're shooting when you're doing like an overall engine shot. If you got to kind of go to angle or zoom in a little bit, just be aware of that.
Okay, so Ryan, so we've learned a lot of tips and best practices for using our phone to take better pictures of cars. I think we've covered most everything, but I did have one question that was kind of lingering, and that was, should I utilize the zoom feature on my cell phone?
I would say not, because all it's doing is just essentially cropping in on your picture. You're going to lose resolution. You're going to lose detail. You could just take a wide shot and just crop it later, and it's going to be exactly the same thing. So the best technique when you're using a cell phone, even some newer ones have a couple of lenses that have different things. So you want to, use the proper lens, the proper length, and then you're going to want to just use your feet. Just get closer to the subject or farther away. If you want a wider shot, just keep walking backwards. That's going to give you the highest quality on a cell phone when you don't have the capability of zooming in, unless you got one of those little kits with a little tiny extra lenses or something like that. Your feet is kind of the tool for that.
Okay, so now that we've learned a lot of tips and best practices for taking better pictures with our cell phone, is there any final thoughts that you have? And then finally, I know there's a lot of free and paid apps on the stores for our cell phones. Do you have any thoughts on that as well? Photo editing.
Yeah, definitely. As far as final thoughts about tips, I would just say that if you're getting out there and you're trying to have some fun taking pictures of cars, the best you can do is just keep shooting, experiment. Start playing around with different tools. Throw in manual mode. Really experiment with your composition. That's a big one that we didn't really mention earlier. It's just start, concentrating on that and experimenting and shooting and shooting and shooting. We don't have the restrictions that we used to. So
okay.
I'd say experiment with all the tools available to you. Photo editing apps, there are a couple. There's a lot of options that I'm sure are great, but a couple that I know I can kind of recommend from personal experience is there's a Lightroom mobile. It's Adobe Lightroom. It's kind of the small mobile version of a full program that a lot of us photographers use. There's a free version as well that gives you a lot of powerful tools, and it's definitely worth checking out, experimenting with, even if you only mess with a couple of the main ones.
Okay.
Another good app is it's called VSCO, or Visco, people kind of call it. It's going to have a lot of the similar types of features. It's also going to have some stuff kind of like Instagram used to, with the different presets. So it's got a lot of presets. It kind of started out as an app like that, but they've implemented a lot of actual editing sliders and different controls that you can go in, and you can do a lot of custom stuff. So those are definitely worth looking out for. Maybe we'll do a more in-depth video on those later to kind of give you a little tutorial on how they work and what they do. I'd say for now, just get in there and start experimenting with it. Start moving some sliders and seeing what they do.
Okay, Ryan, I really appreciate you taking the time today. What else do we have to do, right?
Yeah, not a whole lot else going on right now.
Right. So we might as well take our cell phones, get our cars out there, even if it's in our driveway, and have some fun, experiment, take some photos. And if
take advantage of the extra time you have. Just play around in your driveway, see what the principles do, see how the light works.
Yeah, I would tell you this: if you're watching this video and you've taken some of these tips and you're going to start taking some pictures, we'd love to see what you're doing with them. And I know Ryan would probably love to see them as well. So
Yeah.
if you share those to your Instagram account, maybe just hashtag them AutoUrge tips, and we'd love to see the progression you're making with your cell phone photos. So again, Ryan, thanks again for your time, and I look forward
Thanks
to
for having me.
I look forward to maybe doing another video where we can dive into some of those free photo editing apps as well.
Definitely.
All right, thank you, and we'll see you all soon, and be safe.
See you later.